When my daughter-in-law called me at 3 a.m, screaming that she was hemorrhaging and needed me to come to the hospital right away, my first thought wasn't fear for her safety. It wasn't even anger at being woken up. It was something much quieter, much colder. I remember sitting up in bed, my hand still on the phone, and thinking with perfect clarity, "But I'm old people. You don't want old people around." I went to that hospital. Yes. I drove through the dark Phoenix streets with my hands gripping the steering wheel, so tight my knuckles went white. But something in me had already made a decision that would change everything between us. I helped her that night, because that's what decent people do. But I didn't help her the way I would have 6 months earlier, before my son got married in secret, and his bride made it crystal clear that a 69-year-old woman had no place in their new life. My name is Margaret Louise Thompson, though everyone who's ever loved me calls me Maggie. I'm 69 years old, and until the day my only son David told me over the phone, that he'd gotten married without inviting me, I thought I understood what heartbreak felt like. I buried my husband James 8 years ago, after 41 years of marriage. I held his hand while his heart gave out in our bedroom, the same bedroom where we'd raised our son, celebrated anniversaries, and planned our retirement. I thought nothing could hurt worse than that. I was wrong. Before I tell you how I ended up at that hospital, before I explain the choice I made that night that my son still doesn't understand, I need you to know what led to that phone call. Because this isn't a story about one cruel moment. This is a story about watching someone you raised, someone you loved more than your own breath, slowly decide you're not worth including in the most important moments of their life. If you're listening to this, I want you to know something important before we go any further. These stories, these real stories from women like me who've lived long enough to see both the beauty and the ugliness in people, they're here because someone needs to hear them. Maybe it's you. Maybe you're dealing with something similar, or maybe you just need to know you're not alone in whatever you're facing. This channel survives because of listeners like you, and I mean that sincerely. So if this story resonates with you, if you find yourself nodding along or feeling seen, please take just 1 second, literally 1 second, to hit that like button. It seems small, but it helps this story reach other women who need to hear it. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the stories coming next, because every one of them comes from real life, real pain, and real triumph. And please, comment below what you think or where you're watching from. I love knowing this community spans different cities, states, and countries. Your support isn't just numbers on a screen. It's what allows these stories to reach women who might be sitting alone right now, wondering if anyone else understands. Thank you for being here, truly. I was born in 1956 in a small town called Prescott, about 100 miles north of Phoenix. My father worked for the railroad, and my mother cleaned houses for the wealthy families up on the hill. We weren't poor, but we weren't comfortable either. We were that in-between place where you always have enough to eat but never enough to stop worrying. I was the youngest of 4 girls, and by the time I came along my parents were tired. Not neglectful, just tired. I learned early how to take care of myself. I met James Thompson when I was 18 years old at a church social in 1974. He was 21, fresh out of vocational school, and had just gotten a job as a mechanic at a garage in Phoenix. He had these steady hands that could take apart an engine and put it back together like it was nothing. Hands that would later hold our son when he was born. Hands that would stroke my hair when I was worried. We got married 6 months after we met, which everyone said was too fast. But we knew. Some people just know. We moved to Phoenix in 1975, and James got a better job, had a bigger garage. We rented a small house in a working-class neighborhood near 7th Avenue and Indian School Road. The house was old even then, with creaky floors and a swamp cooler that barely worked in the summer, but it was ours. Or at least it felt like ours. The landlord was a man named Mr. Hernandez, who owned half the houses on our block, and he was fair about rent, which was all we could ask for. I got a job as a secretary at a dentist's office downtown. Dr. Morrison was a kind man who wore bow ties and always had butterscotch candies in his pocket for the children who came in scared. I worked there for 31 years, until I retired in 2006. The job didn't pay much, but it was steady, and combined with James's income, we managed. We never took vacations that required plane tickets, never ate at restaurants where you needed reservations, never bought anything that wasn't on sale. But we were happy. We had each other, and we had plans. David James Thompson was born on November 3rd, 1986, after we'd been married for 11 years. Those 11 years had been full of hope and disappointment. 3 miscarriages that left me hollowed out each time, wondering if I was broken, if we'd ever have a family. When I finally carried David to term and heard him cry for the first time, I thought my heart would burst right out of my chest. James cried too, which I'd never seen him do before. We named him David after James's father, who died in the Korean War before James was born. I was 30 years old when David came into the world, and James was 33. By the standards of the 1980s, we were old to be having our first child, but we didn't care. David was perfect. He had James's dark brown hair and my green eyes, and from the very beginning he was curious about everything. He was the kind of baby who didn't cry much, who just watched the world with these wide, intelligent eyes, taking it all in. Our neighborhood was a mix of families. Mexican, white, some black families, a few Vietnamese families who'd come over after the war. Everyone looked out for each other's kids. David grew up playing in the street with children whose parents spoke different languages at home, but who all understood each other perfectly when they were kicking a ball around or riding bikes up and down the sidewalk. It was the kind of neighborhood where you could leave your door unlocked, where everyone knew everyone else's business, but in a caring way, not a nosy way. James and I both worked hard to give David everything we could. Not everything he wanted. We couldn't afford that. But everything we could manage. He had a roof over his head, food on the table, clothes that fit, and parents who showed up to every school event, every baseball game, every science fair. James taught him how to work on cars, how to fix things around the house, how to be the kind of man who doesn't call someone else when something breaks. I taught him how to be kind, how to think about other people's feelings, how to say, thank you, and please, and I'm sorry. David was smart, not genius-level smart, but solid smart, the kind of smart that comes with hard work and discipline. He did well in school, got good grades, stayed out of trouble. He played baseball in high school, was on the debate team, had a nice group of friends who came over to the house and called me Mrs. T and ate everything in the refrigerator. Normal kid things. Good kid things. When David graduated from high school in 2004, James and I were so proud we could have burst. Neither of us had gone to college. We'd gone straight to work after high school because that's what people like us did in the 70s. But we'd saved for years to help David go. Not enough to cover everything, but enough that, combined with his partial baseball scholarship and his part-time job at the grocery store, he could make it work. He went to Arizona State University, living at home to save money, studying business administration because he said he wanted to have his own company someday. Those 4 years while David was in college were some of the best years of my life. He'd come home after classes, and we'd sit at the kitchen table while I made dinner, and he'd tell me about his professors, his classes, his friends. He dated a few girls, never anyone serious. He'd bring them by the house sometimes, polite young women who'd shake our hands and make small talk. None of them lasted more than a few months, and David never seemed too broken up about it when things ended. James had his first heart attack in 2007, right after David graduated from college. David was 21, just starting his first real job as a sales associate at a software company. I'll never forget the morning it happened. James and I were getting ready for work, and he suddenly grabbed his chest and went white. I called 911, rode with him in the ambulance, held his hand in the emergency room while the doctors worked on him. He survived that one, came home 2 weeks later with a drawer full of medications and instructions to change his diet, reduce stress, exercise more. We thought we'd have more time. That's what everyone thinks, isn't it? You think you'll have years to do all the things you planned, to say all the things you need to say. James went back to work part-time, took it easier, tried to follow the doctor's orders. David was wonderful during that time. He came by the house almost every day, helped his dad with projects around the house that had been piling up, made sure I wasn't carrying the burden alone. But then David's career started taking off. The software company promoted him, gave him more responsibility, sent him to training programs in other cities. He started dating more seriously, though none of the relationships seemed to stick. He was ambitious, driven, focused on building his career. I was proud of him, even as I saw him less and less. That's what you want for your kids, right? You want them to be successful, to have better lives than you did, even if it means they don't have as much time for you. James died in February 2017, 8 years after that first heart attack. It was a Sunday morning and we were still in bed. I woke up and knew immediately something was wrong. He wasn't breathing right. I shook him, called his name, called 911 again, but this time the paramedics couldn't save him. He was 60 years old. We'd been married for 41 years. David was 30 years old, working as a sales manager by then, making good money, living in his own apartment on the other side of town. The grief was like nothing I'd ever experienced. It was physical, this weight pressing down on my chest that made it hard to breathe, made it hard to get out of bed in the morning. David helped with the funeral arrangements, helped me sort through James's things, helped me figure out the finances. I was grateful for that help, even as I noticed how quickly he had to get back to work, how his phone was always ringing, how he seemed distracted even while we were planning his father's service. After James died, the house felt too big and too empty at the same time. All those rooms that had been filled with life, David's childhood bedroom, the garage where James worked on cars, the kitchen where we'd had dinner together every night for decades. They all echoed now. I kept working at the dentist's office until I retired later that year. Dr. Morrison had retired himself years before, and the new dentist who bought the practice didn't need a 61-year-old secretary, though he was kind enough not to say it that way. David visited regularly at first, maybe once a week. We'd have dinner, watch television, talk about his work. He'd moved up to a regional sales manager position that required a lot of travel. He was doing well, making more money than James and I had ever dreamed of. I was proud of him, even as I felt him slipping further and further away from me. Not in a dramatic way, not like he stopped caring, just in the way that happens when people's lives take different paths. I started volunteering at a community center in my neighborhood, helping run a lunch program for seniors. It gave me something to do, people to talk to, a reason to get out of the house. The other volunteers became my friends. Women mostly. Some of them widows like me. Some of them still married but lonely anyway. We'd have coffee after our shifts, complain about our kids who didn't call enough, share pictures of grandchildren. I'd look at those pictures and feel a pang, wondering if David would ever settle down, if I'd ever have grandchildren of my own. Then, in the summer of 2024, David mentioned that he'd started seeing someone seriously. Her name was Ashley. She worked in marketing, and they'd met at a work conference. He showed me her picture on his phone, a pretty blonde woman with a sharp smile and intelligent eyes. I asked when I could meet her, and he said soon, but soon kept not happening. They'd been dating for 3 months, and I still hadn't met her. Finally, in October 2024, David brought Ashley to Sunday dinner at my house. I cleaned the entire house for 3 days before they came, made pot roast with potatoes and carrots because it was David's favorite, baked an apple pie from scratch. I wanted to make a good impression, wanted her to see that David came from a loving family, that I was someone worth knowing. Ashley was polite but distant. She called me Mrs. Thompson even after I told her to call me Maggie. She didn't eat much of the dinner I'd spent all day preparing, said she was watching her carbs. She and David left after less than 2 hours, saying they had early meetings the next day. I stood at the door and watched their car drive away, and I had this sinking feeling in my stomach that I couldn't quite name. Over the next few months I saw David even less than before. He'd call occasionally, always rushed, always about to jump into a meeting or catch a flight. When I asked about Ashley, he'd say things were great. They were getting serious. But I still didn't see her again. He didn't invite me to meet her parents. He didn't include me in their plans. I started to feel like I was being slowly edited out of my own son's life. By January 2025, I hadn't seen David in person in over 2 months. We'd talked on the phone a handful of times, brief conversations where he sounded distracted. I'd call and he wouldn't answer, would text back hours later saying he was sorry, he was swamped at work. I told myself it was normal, that young people are busy, that I was being sensitive. But late at night, lying alone in the house where I'd raised him, I'd feel this ache in my chest that had nothing to do with age, and everything to do with being forgotten. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon in March 2025. I remember the date exactly, March 18th. I was in the garden, pulling weeds from the flower bed where I'd planted roses years ago, when James was still alive. The Arizona sun was warm on my back, and I was thinking about nothing in particular, just focused on the simple, methodical work of clearing away the things that didn't belong. My phone rang, and I pulled off my gardening gloves to answer it. David's name showed on the screen, and I felt a little flutter of happiness. It had been almost a week since we'd talked, and I missed his voice. "Hey, sweetheart," I said, pressing the phone to my ear. "How are you?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, just long enough to make my stomach tighten. Then David's voice, sounding strained and uncomfortable. "Hey, Mom. Listen, I need to tell you something." I sat down on the garden bench James had built 20 years ago, the wood smooth under my hands from decades of use. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" "I'm fine. Everything's fine. It's just..." Another pause. "Ashley and I got married last weekend." The words hung in the air like smoke. I heard them. I understood the individual words, but somehow they didn't make sense together. Got married last weekend. Past tense. Already done. You... what? My voice sounded strange to my own ears, high and thin. We got married. It was just a small thing, really quick. Just us and a few close friends. Very low-key. I tried to process this information. My only son, my only child, had gotten married. Without telling me, without inviting me, without even mentioning he was planning to get married. David, I don't understand. Why didn't you tell me? I would have been there. I would have... Mom, it wasn't a big deal. We didn't want a big production. It was literally just like 10 people. Very casual. 10 people. He'd invited 10 people, and I wasn't one of them. But I'm your mother. I know, and I'm sorry, okay? It just happened really fast, and we wanted to keep it small and simple. No parents, no big family thing, just us and our closest friends. No parents. Like his father wasn't dead. Like I wasn't the only parent he had left. Like I was just some random person who could be excluded from one of the most important moments of his life. Did Ashley's parents know? Another pause. Longer this time. No. Like I said, no parents. I should have let it go. I should have congratulated him, told him I was happy for him, been the bigger person. But something in me cracked. I need to talk to Ashley. Mom, that's not... I need to talk to her. Please put her on the phone. I heard muffled voices, the sound of the phone being handed over. Then a woman's voice, crisp and professional. Mrs. Thompson? I just need to understand, I said, and I hated how my voice shook. Help me understand why you didn't want David's mother at your wedding. Ashley sighed, the sound of someone who's been interrupted during a busy day. Look, I'm sorry if your feelings are hurt, but David and I wanted our wedding to be young and fun and energetic. We didn't want it to turn into some obligation thing where we had to manage a bunch of older people who wouldn't enjoy it anyway. We wanted to dance and drink and have a good time with our friends, you know? We didn't want old people there making it feel like some stuffy, formal event. Old people. She said it so casually, so matter-of-factly, like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. Like I wasn't a person, just a category. Old people. Not David's mother who'd raised him alone after his father died. Not the woman who'd sacrificed so he could go to college. Not someone who loved him more than anything in the world. Just old people. An inconvenience. A mood killer. I'm 69 years old, I said quietly. Right, exactly. You'd have been uncomfortable anyway. Trust me, it was better this way. You didn't miss anything. I'd been married for 41 years. I'd planned my own wedding in 1975, a small ceremony at a church in Prescott with 50 people, mostly family. I'd worn my mother's dress, altered to fit me. James's hands had shaken when he put the ring on my finger. It was one of the most important days of my entire life, and my son's wife was telling me I didn't miss anything. I need to go, I said. Mrs. Thompson, please don't make this a thing. David and I are very happy, and we hope you can be happy for us. I hung up. I sat on that bench in my garden, surrounded by roses I'd planted with my husband, in the yard where my son had played as a child, and I felt something inside me go cold and still. Not hot anger, not sharp grief, just cold. Like something had frozen over and would never thaw again. David called me back 5 minutes later. Mom, Ashley didn't mean to upset you. She's just being honest. You know how young people are these days. They're more direct. You agree with her, I said. It wasn't a question. I think she has a point about keeping things with our peer group. It was our day, and we wanted it to be how we wanted it. Our day. Not a day to celebrate with family, not a day to honor the people who'd loved him his whole life. Just their day, their friends, their peer group. Your father would have been heartbroken. Dad's not here, Mom, And you can't guilt-trip me about this. We made a choice, and I'm sorry if you don't like it. But it's done now. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to reach through the phone and shake him, and ask him when he'd become this person who could hurt me so casually. Instead, I said, "Congratulations on your marriage, David. I hope you'll be very happy." Mom. I hung up again, and then I turned off my phone and sat in my garden until the sun went down and the air grew cold, and I wondered how I'd raised a son who thought I was too old to matter. The next few weeks were a blur of hurt and confusion. David texted me a few times, casual messages like nothing had happened. "Hope you're doing well. Busy week at work." Like he hadn't just told me I was too old to witness one of the most important moments of his life. I responded with brief, polite messages. "That's nice. Take care." I told the women at the community center what had happened. They were outraged on my behalf, told me I should cut him off, told me he didn't deserve me. But I couldn't do that. He was still my son. I still loved him, even if he'd broken my heart. But something had changed in me. I'd spent my whole life putting David first, making sure he had everything he needed, supporting his choices, being available whenever he needed me. And when it came time for him to choose whether to include me in his life, he'd chosen to exclude me. Not because of anything I'd done, but because of what I was. Old. I started noticing things I'd ignored before. The way David had always been slightly embarrassed when I met his friends. How he'd introduce me quickly and then change the subject. The way he'd stopped inviting me to his work events after James died. The way he'd gradually stopped talking about his life with me, keeping our conversations surface level and brief. It hadn't happened all at once. It had been gradual. So gradual I hadn't noticed it until it was complete. In April, David called to tell me they were trying for a baby. "Ashley wants to start trying right away. We're both excited." I congratulated him, because what else could I do? I asked if I could take them out to dinner to celebrate, and he said they were really busy, but maybe in a few weeks. Those few weeks never came. I saw him once in May, a brief lunch where he spent half the time on his phone, and left after 45 minutes. He didn't mention the baby plans. He didn't ask about my life. It was like having lunch with a polite stranger who happened to look like my son. In June, I got a text message. "Ashley's pregnant. 8 weeks along. Everything looks good." A text message. Not a phone call. Not a visit. A text message like he was telling me he'd been promoted at work or bought a new car. I called him immediately. "David, that's wonderful news. How is Ashley feeling?" "She's okay. Morning sickness is pretty rough, but her doctor says that's normal." "I'd love to take her to lunch, talk about what she needs. I remember when I was pregnant with you." "Mom, she's really busy with work, and honestly, she's got a lot of support from her mom and her sister. They're helping her out with stuff." Her mom, her sister, the old people who were somehow acceptable, somehow not too old to be involved. "I see. But we'll definitely keep you updated. I'll send you ultrasound pictures when we get them." That was it. That was the extent of my inclusion in my grandchild's life. Ultrasound pictures via text. I was being allowed to observe from a distance, like a neighbor who waves from across the street. Close enough to see, too far to matter. July and August passed in a strange limbo. David would text me updates. "Ashley's feeling better. Second trimester is easier. And we found out it's a boy. And we painted the nursery blue." Short, factual updates that told me what was happening, but made it clear I wasn't part of it. I'd respond with enthusiasm I didn't quite feel, always hoping he'd call, always hoping he'd invite me over, always disappointed. In September, I drove by their house. I'd gotten the address from one of the ultrasound pictures David had sent me. I could see part of their address on a piece of mail in the background. They lived in a new development in Scottsdale, one of those modern subdivisions with big houses and perfectly landscaped yards. I didn't knock on the door. I just drove by slowly, looking at the house where my son lived, where my grandson would be born, where I apparently wasn't welcome. I should have been preparing for a grandchild. I should have been knitting blankets, buying tiny clothes, getting ready to help with middle-of-the-night feedings and diaper changes and all the exhausting, wonderful work of caring for a newborn. Instead, I was sitting alone in my house, waiting for text messages that told me I was being kept informed but not included. October came, and David texted to say Ashley was doing great. Due date was mid-January. "We're doing a registry if you want to buy something for the baby." Like I was a distant relative, they felt obligated to notify. Not the grandmother. Not the woman who'd raised David by herself after his father died. I went to the registry. I bought practical things. Diapers, wipes, bottles. Nothing personal. Nothing with love in it. Just things from a list. The same things anyone could buy. I had the store ship them directly. I didn't include a note. In November, David called. Actually called, not texted, to tell me Ashley had been put on modified bed rest. "Her blood pressure is a little high. Doctor wants her to take it easy. Work from home. Not stress too much." "Is she okay? Is the baby okay?" "They're both fine. It's just a precaution. Her mom is staying with us for a while to help out." Her mom. Again. "Do you need anything?" "I could bring over some meals or—" "We're good, Mom. Like I said, Ashley's mom is here. But thanks for offering." I hung up feeling like I'd been slapped. Even in crisis, even when they needed help, I was surplus. Unnecessary. Too old to be useful. December was worse. David stopped responding to my calls, would only text back hours later with brief messages. "Sorry. Crazy busy with work and Ashley stuff. We'll call soon." He never did call. On Christmas, I got a group text with a picture of their tree and a generic "Merry Christmas" from the Thompson family message. Like I was someone on a mass mailing list, not his mother. I spent Christmas alone. I'd gotten used to that since James died, but this year it felt different. This year I wasn't alone because life had dealt me a bad hand. I was alone because I'd been deliberately excluded, because I was old people, and old people weren't wanted. By early January 2026, I'd stopped expecting anything from David. I'd stopped hoping he'd include me, stopped waiting for him to realize what he was doing to me. I'd accepted that this was what our relationship was now. Distant, surface level, maintained out of obligation rather than love. It hurt, but I'd learned to live with hurts before. You don't get to be 69 without learning how to carry pain. The baby was due in the middle of January. I didn't know the exact date. David hadn't told me, and I didn't ask. I assumed I'd find out after the baby was born, through a text message with a picture and basic statistics. Weight, length, time of birth. The same information you'd give to anyone. I was at peace with it, or as close to peace as I could get. I'd grieved the relationship I thought I had with my son, and I was learning to accept the relationship I actually had. It wasn't what I wanted, but it was what it was. I had no idea that everything was about to change, in the worst possible way. The call came at 3:47 in the morning, on January 15th, 2026. I know the exact time, because I looked at the clock on my nightstand when the phone rang, my heart already pounding before I was even fully awake. Nothing good ever comes from a phone call in the middle of the night. Ashley's name showed on the screen. Not David's. Ashley's. The daughter-in-law who'd told me I was too old to attend her wedding, who'd made it clear I wasn't welcome in their lives. She was calling me at 3:47 in the morning. I answered. "Hello? Maggie?" Her voice was wrong, high and panicked and breaking. "Maggie, I need you." My body went cold. "What's wrong? Is it the baby?" "I'm bleeding. I'm at Phoenix General. They rushed me here an hour ago. And I'm bleeding so much. And David's in San Diego for work. And he can't get a flight until morning. And my mom is in Florida for my aunt's surgery. And my sister is in New York. And the doctors keep talking about hemorrhaging and emergency procedures. And I'm so scared. And I don't know what to do. And I need... She was sobbing now, the words barely coherent. In the background, I could hear hospital sounds, beeping machines, voices calling to each other, the ominous rolling of gurneys. "Is the baby okay?" I asked. "They did an emergency C-section 20 minutes ago. He's alive, but he's in the NICU, and they won't let me see him because they need to stop the bleeding. And I'm alone here, and I'm so scared. And please..." That's when it hit me. The full weight of what she was asking. She was asking me to come to the hospital, to be with her, to help her, after telling me I was too old to be at her wedding, after excluding me from every part of her pregnancy, after making it clear I was unwelcome in her life. Now, in crisis, when everyone else was too far away, she was calling me. I should have felt victorious. I should have felt a rush of satisfaction, of vindication. She needed me now. After all the hurt, all the exclusion, she was the one calling in the middle of the night, desperate and alone. Instead, I felt empty. "Please," Ashley said again, her voice breaking. "Please. I know we... Just... Please come. I'm begging you." I sat up in bed. The house was dark except for the dim light from the street lamp outside my window. I could hang up. I could tell her I was too old to be driving in the middle of the night, that old people need their sleep, that she should call one of her young friends who'd been at her wedding. I could let her feel what it's like to be excluded, to need someone who isn't there. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, I heard myself say. "Thank you. Thank you. Emergency room entrance, 3rd floor labor, and delivery. Please hurry." I hung up and sat in the darkness for a moment. James's side of the bed was empty, as it had been for 8 years. If he were here, what would he say? Would he tell me to go? To help? Because that's what decent people do? Or would he understand if I stayed home, if I protected myself from being used? But I wasn't James. And I was already getting dressed, pulling on jeans and a sweater, grabbing my purse and keys. Not because I'd forgiven her, not because I wasn't hurt anymore, but because there was a baby in the NICU, and a terrified woman bleeding in a hospital, and I was the only person available to help. That's what you do when someone's dying. Even if that someone hurt you, you show up. The drive to Phoenix General took 23 minutes. The streets were empty at 4 a.m. Just a few cars here and there. Night shift workers heading home or early morning commuters heading in. I drove carefully, my hands tight on the wheel, my mind strangely blank. I wasn't thinking about Ashley or David or what this meant. I was just driving, focused on the simple act of getting from point A to point B. I parked in the emergency lot and followed the signs to the labor and delivery floor. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and fear. The fluorescent lights were too bright, making everything look harsh and unreal. A nurse at the desk looked up when I approached. "I'm here for Ashley Thompson," I said. "She called me. She's hemorrhaging." The nurse's expression changed, became focused and urgent. "Are you family?" I'm her mother-in-law. Room 347. Hurry! I hurried. Down a hallway past rooms where I could hear women in labor, crying out, being comforted by partners and family. Past a waiting room where a man sat with his head in his hands. Past a vending machine and a janitor mopping the floor. To room 347. Ashley was on a bed surrounded by medical equipment. There were tubes in her arms, monitors beeping, a blood pressure cuff automatically inflating and deflating. She was white, not pale, white, like all the blood had drained out of her face. When she saw me, she started crying harder. You came. You actually came. I walked to her bedside. Up close, I could see she was shaking. Of course I came. A doctor entered behind me, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and capable hands. Are you Mrs. Thompson's mother? Mother-in-law. We need to do a procedure immediately to stop the bleeding. It's called a D&C, and she'll be under general anesthesia. It's risky given how much blood she's lost. But if we don't do it now, she could die. I need you to stay calm for her sake. Can you do that? Die. Ashley could die. This 33-year-old woman who told me I was too old to matter could die in the next hour. Yes. Good. We're taking her in now. Wait in the room, and someone will update you as soon as we can. They wheeled Ashley out. She grabbed my hand as they passed, squeezed it hard. Please don't leave. Please stay. Promise me you won't leave. I looked down at her. This woman who'd excluded me, who'd hurt me more deeply than she could possibly understand. And I said, I promise, I'll be here. They took her away, and I was alone in the room with all the equipment that had been keeping her alive. I sat in the chair next to the bed and waited. It was 4:32 a.m. I called David. It went to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail again. I texted, Your wife is in surgery. She was hemorrhaging. Call me immediately. 10 minutes later, he called. Mom, what's going on? Ashley texted me, but I was asleep and... She had an emergency C-section. The baby's in the NICU. She started hemorrhaging and they're doing a procedure now to stop the bleeding. You need to get here as fast as you can. Oh my God. Oh my God. Is she gonna be okay? I don't know. The doctor said it's risky. You need to be here, David. I'm at the airport now, but the earliest flight isn't until 6:30. And I won't get there until Tyne or Zo at the earliest with the flight time and just get here. Mom, thank you for being there. I know things have been weird between us, but thank you for going when she called. Weird. He thought things had been weird. We'll talk about this later. Focus on getting here. I hung up and sat back in the chair. The wait began. 4:45 a.m. 5:00 a.m. 5:15 a.m. The sun was starting to come up outside, pink light filtering through the window. Somewhere in this hospital, my grandson was in the NICU, and I didn't even know his name. Somewhere in an operating room, Ashley was unconscious, possibly dying, and I'd promised I'd be here. At 5:47 a.m., the doctor came back. Mrs. Thompson. I stood up. How is she? We stopped the bleeding. She's stable now, though she's lost a lot of blood. We're giving her transfusions and she'll need to stay here for at least a week for monitoring. But she's going to be okay. I sat back down, suddenly dizzy. And the baby? The baby is doing remarkably well considering the circumstances. He's in the NICU as a precaution, but his vitals are strong. You can go see him if you'd like, or you can wait for Mrs. Thompson to wake up. I'll wait for her. They brought Ashley back to the room an hour later, still unconscious from the anesthesia. I sat beside her bed and waited for her to wake up. I thought about all the times I'd imagined being here for the birth of my grandchild. In my imagination, I'd been in the delivery room, or at least in the waiting room, excited and nervous. David would have come to get me, told me it was a boy or a girl, let me hold the baby while he called other family. It would have been joyful, a celebration. Instead, I was sitting alone in a room where my daughter-in-law had almost died, waiting for her to wake up so I could keep the promise I'd made to a woman who'd told me I was too old to attend her wedding. Ashley's eyes opened at 7:15 a.m. She looked at me, and for a moment she seemed confused about where she was or why I was there. Then memory came back, and tears started rolling down her cheeks. You stayed. I promised I would. I almost died. But you didn't. She closed her eyes. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. About everything. About the wedding. About cutting you out. About all of it. I was so wrong. I should have said something comforting. I should have told her it was okay, that all was forgiven, that we'd start fresh. Instead, I said, yes, you were wrong. Her eyes opened again, surprised. You were cruel. I continued, my voice steady and calm. You excluded me from my only son's wedding because you thought I was too old to matter. You shut me out of your pregnancy, out of preparing for this baby, out of everything that mattered. You made me feel like I was worthless because of my age. And now, when everyone else in your life was too far away to help, you called me. And I came, because that's what decent people do. But don't mistake my decency for forgiveness. Don't think that showing up in a crisis erases months of cruelty. Ashley was crying openly now. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I was terrible to you. I was shallow and cruel, and I said unforgivable things. But please don't punish the baby for what I did. He needs his grandmother. And there it was, the truth laid bare. She didn't want my forgiveness for herself. She wanted it for the baby. She wanted me to step in now and be the helpful grandmother, provide the free childcare and the emotional support, and all the things grandmothers do, without addressing any of the hurt she'd caused. I'm not punishing anyone, I said. I'll help you through this medical crisis, because you could die otherwise and your baby needs his mother. But after you're released from this hospital, after you're home and safe, you and David and I are going to have a very serious conversation about what kind of relationship we're going to have going forward, because I will not be the grandmother who gets called only in emergencies. I will not be the backup plan, the last resort, the person you turn to when everyone else is unavailable. Either I matter in this child's life or I don't. But I won't live in this middle ground anymore, where I'm good enough to help, but not good enough to include. Before Ashley could respond, David burst into the room. He looked terrible, unshaven, his clothes wrinkled, his eyes wild. Ashley! Oh my God, are you okay? He rushed to her bedside, and I stood up, giving them space. He took her hand, kissed her forehead, checked the monitors like he could understand what they meant. Then he turned to me. Mom, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. The nurse told me what happened, how you got here so fast, how you stayed through the surgery. I can't thank you enough. Don't thank me yet, I said. We need to talk, David. The three of us. But not right now. Right now, you need to be with your wife, and you need to meet your son. Have you seen him? No. That's for you to do first. David looked at me with something like gratitude, but also confusion. Like he couldn't quite understand why I wasn't more emotional, why I wasn't crying with relief or anger or joy. Okay, I'll go see him now. Will you stay with Ashley? I looked at Ashley, who was watching me with red, swollen eyes. I'll stay until the nurse says she's stable enough to be alone. Then I'm going home to get some rest. Mom, I'll be back this evening. We'll talk then. I walked out of the room before either of them could say anything else. I walked down the hallway, past the labor and delivery rooms, past the waiting area, past the vending machines. I took the elevator down to the parking lot, got in my car, and drove home as the sun rose over Phoenix, turning the sky orange and pink and gold. When I got home, I walked straight to my bedroom, lay down on top of the covers, and stared at the ceiling. I'd done the right thing. I'd shown up when someone needed help. I'd kept my promise. But I hadn't forgiven them, and I wasn't sure I ever would, because helping someone in crisis doesn't erase months of deliberate cruelty. It doesn't make up for being told you're too old to matter. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, but all I could think about was the conversation we'd have that evening, and what I was going to say, and whether anything could ever really be repaired between us, and whether I even wanted it to be. I thought of those women at the community center who'd told me to cut David off entirely. Maybe they'd been right. Maybe some hurts are too deep to heal. Maybe some relationships can't be saved. But there was a baby now, a grandson I hadn't met, who needed people in his life who would love him and show up for him. And I didn't know how to balance that need with my own need to protect myself from more hurt. I fell asleep sometime around noon, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep and everything to do with emotional devastation. When I woke up 3 hours later, I had 17 missed calls from David and a dozen text messages begging me to call him back, saying they needed to talk, saying, "Please don't give up on them." I looked at those messages for a long time. Then I got up, took a shower, got dressed, and prepared for the conversation that would determine everything about how the rest of my life would look. But if you're listening to this now, wondering what I decided, wondering if I forgave them or cut them off or found some middle ground, I need you to pause for just a moment. This story matters. Stories like this matter because they remind us that we all have choices about how we're treated, about what we're willing to accept from the people we love. If this is resonating with you, if you're nodding along or feeling seen, please hit that like button right now. It takes 1 second, but it helps this story reach other women who need to hear it. And please comment below what you're thinking about all this. Would you have gone to that hospital? Would you have forgiven them? What would you have done? I want to hear from you. Your thoughts, your experiences, your wisdom. We're all in this together, figuring out how to navigate these impossible situations. So please share your thoughts. This community is built on real voices, sharing real experiences, and yours matters. I went back to the hospital at 6 o'clock that evening. The sun was setting as I drove, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. I'd spent the afternoon thinking about what I wanted to say, how I wanted to say it, what boundaries I needed to set. I'd also called one of my friends from the community center, a woman named Patricia, whose daughter had cut her off for 3 years before coming back and expecting Patricia to babysit every weekend. Patricia had set firm boundaries, and it had saved their relationship. "Don't let them make you feel guilty," Patricia had said. "You did nothing wrong. They excluded you. They hurt you. And now they need you. That doesn't mean you have to pretend like nothing happened. You have every right to set terms for how this relationship moves forward." I carried those words with me as I walked back into Phoenix General, back up to the 3rd floor, back to room 347. David was sitting beside Ashley's bed when I entered. Ashley was awake, sitting up slightly, looking much better than she had that morning. She'd gotten color back in her face, though she still looked weak. They both turned when I came in, and I could see the anxiety in their faces. They didn't know what I was going to say or do. Good. Let them be uncertain. Let them feel a fraction of what I'd felt for the past 9 months. I pulled a chair over and sat down facing both of them. I'm going to talk, and you're going to listen. Then you can respond, and we'll figure out where we go from here. Understood? They both nodded. I took a breath. 9 months ago, David called me to tell me he'd gotten married without inviting me. Not married that day. Not married that week. Married the week before. Past tense. Already done. He'd chosen 10 people to attend his wedding, and I wasn't one of them. His only parent, the woman who raised him alone after his father died, wasn't important enough to be one of those 10 people. David opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. I'm talking. You're listening. He closed his mouth. When I asked to speak to Ashley, she told me that you didn't want old people at your wedding. Those were her exact words. We didn't want old people there. Like I'm not a person, just a category. Old people. Too old to be included in one of the most important days of my son's life. Too old to matter. Ashley was crying silently, tears running down her face, but I continued. For 9 months, you've excluded me from everything. From your pregnancy, from preparing for this baby, from every meaningful moment. David, you sent me text messages like I was someone on a mailing list, not your mother. You didn't invite me to see the nursery, didn't ask for my help or advice, didn't include me in any of it. And Ashley, you made it clear that your mother and your sister were the family that mattered, and I was just someone who had to be occasionally informed out of obligation. I paused, making sure I had their full attention. This morning, when Ashley was bleeding and alone and terrified, when everyone else in her life was too far away to help, she called me. And I came. Because that's what decent people do when someone is dying. I came, and I stayed, and I kept my promise to be here. But I want both of you to understand something very clearly. My showing up in a crisis doesn't mean I've forgiven you. It doesn't mean we're okay now. It doesn't mean we're going to go back to how things were before. Mom, David started. Let me finish. If we're going to have any kind of relationship going forward, and I mean all 3 of us, plus this baby, then things are going to change. I'm not going to be the grandmother who gets called only for emergencies or when you need free babysitting. I'm not going to be the backup plan, the last resort, the person you turn to when it's convenient. Either I'm part of this family, and I matter, or I'm not, and I'll step back completely. But I will not live in this limbo anymore, where you treat me like I'm simultaneously irrelevant and required. I looked directly at Ashley. You owe me an apology, a real one, not the one you gave me this morning when you were scared and wanted comfort. A real apology where you acknowledge the specific things you did wrong and you commit to doing better. And you owe me changed behavior to back up that apology. Words are easy. Actions are what matter. Then I looked at David. And you're my son, and I love you. But you've broken my heart. You chose your wife's cruelty over your mother's feelings. You went along with excluding me. And then you acted like I was being unreasonable for being hurt. You need to decide what kind of man you want to be. What kind of father you want to be to that little boy in the NICU. Because if you're the kind of man who thinks it's okay to discard people when they're no longer convenient, then you're going to teach your son to be that kind of man too. And I won't watch that happen. The room was silent except for the beeping of Ashley's monitors and her quiet crying. David looked stunned, like he'd never imagined I would speak to him this way. Good. Maybe it was time he saw me as something other than his endlessly patient, endlessly forgiving mother. Now, I said. "If you want me to be part of this baby's life, here are my terms. First, I will be introduced as Grandma from day one. Not Mrs. Thompson, not Maggie, but Grandma. This child will know who I am and that I matter. Second, I will be invited to family events, holidays, birthdays, all of it. Not as an afterthought, not when it's convenient, but as family. Third, you will apologize to me in front of anyone you told about your wedding after the fact. You will explain that you made a mistake and that you're sorry. I won't have people thinking I was excluded because I did something wrong. Fourth, and this is non-negotiable, you will never ever make another major life decision without at least telling me about it first. I'm not saying you need my permission. I'm saying you need to respect me enough to keep me informed." I stood up. "Those are my terms. Take them or leave them. You don't have to answer right now. Think about it. Talk about it between yourselves, and let me know. But understand that if you can't agree to these basic acts of respect and inclusion, then I'll step back. I'll send birthday cards and Christmas gifts, but I won't be the actively involved grandmother you seem to want now that it's convenient. I won't put myself through more hurt just to serve your needs." I started to walk toward the door, then turned back. "One more thing. I'm going to meet my grandson before I leave tonight. Not because you've invited me, but because I have a right to meet him. And then I'm going home, and I'll wait for you to decide what kind of relationship we're going to have." I walked out of the room before either of them could respond. My heart was pounding. My hands were shaking. But I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Powerful. I'd stood up for myself. I'd set boundaries. I'd refused to be treated poorly just because someone needed me. I took the elevator down to the NICU on the second floor. The nurse at the desk looked up when I approached. "I'm here to see baby boy Thompson. I'm his grandmother." She checked her computer. "You'll need to verify with the parents first." "I was here this morning when his mother was hemorrhaging. I've been here all day. I have every right to see my grandson." Something in my tone must have convinced her, because she nodded and led me to a washing station. "You'll need to scrub in, put on a gown, no jewelry." I followed her instructions. Then she led me into the NICU. It was a large room full of tiny isolettes with babies inside, each one hooked up to monitors and tubes. She stopped at one near the middle. "This is him." I looked down at the baby inside. He was small, maybe 6 pounds, with a thatch of dark hair and little fists curled up near his face. He was sleeping, his chest rising and falling steadily. He had David's nose, James's chin. He was beautiful. "Can I touch him?" I asked. The nurse nodded. "You can put your hand through the ports here." I reached through the small opening and gently touched his tiny hand. His fingers were so small, so perfect. After a moment, his hand closed around my finger, holding on with that instinctive grip newborns have. And despite everything, despite all the hurt and anger and betrayal, I felt my heart crack open with love for this little person who'd done nothing wrong, who deserved better than the dysfunction his parents had created. "Hi, sweetheart," I whispered. "I'm your grandmother, and I'm going to make sure you grow up knowing what it means to treat people with kindness and respect, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." I stood there for maybe 15 minutes, just watching him sleep, holding his tiny hand. The nurse came back eventually and said visiting hours were ending soon. I carefully extracted my finger from his grip, pulled my hand back through the port, and stood looking at him for a moment longer. "Thank you," I said to the nurse. "Will we be seeing you again?" "I don't know yet. That depends on whether his parents can learn to value the people who love them." I went back to room 347 one last time. David and Ashley were talking in low voices, but they stopped when I entered. I didn't sit down. "I met him," I said. "He's beautiful." "Mom, we've been talking," David said. "You're right, about all of it. We were horrible to you, and you didn't deserve any of it. We want to accept your terms, all of them. We want you to be part of our lives, part of our son's life. And we're so sorry for making you feel like you didn't matter. You matter more than almost anyone." "Almost anyone," I said quietly. David had the grace to look ashamed. "You matter as much as anyone. I'm sorry. That came out wrong. I'm exhausted and scared, and I'm not expressing myself well. What I mean is that you're essential to us, to our family. And we took you for granted, and we hurt you, and we're deeply sorry." I looked at Ashley. "And you?" Ashley wiped her eyes. "I was cruel to you. There's no excuse for what I said, for how I treated you. I was so focused on having the wedding I wanted, the pregnancy I wanted, the life I wanted, that I didn't think about how my choices were hurting someone who only ever wanted to love us. I'm sorry, Maggie. I'm genuinely, truly sorry. And if you're willing to give me a chance to prove that I can do better, I swear I will spend the rest of my life making this up to you." I studied them both for a long moment. They looked sincere, but sincerity in crisis is easy. The real test would come in the months and years ahead, when the emergency was over and old habits started creeping back in. "I'll be back tomorrow," I said finally. "We'll talk more then. Get some rest, both of you." As I drove home that night, I felt something loosening in my chest. I didn't know if we could really repair what had been broken, if their apologies would translate into changed behavior, if they'd actually honor the boundaries I'd set. But I'd said what I needed to say, and I'd stood up for myself, and that was something. The next few days were a blur of hospital visits, conversations, and slow, painful healing. Ashley remained in the hospital for a week, as her doctor had predicted. During that time, David took emergency leave from work, and they both did something I hadn't expected. They listened. They invited me to be there when they chose the baby's name. They'd been considering several options, but hadn't decided yet. We sat in Ashley's hospital room 2 days after our big conversation, and David pulled out a list on his phone. "We were thinking about Jackson, or maybe Lucas, or Harrison," he said. "What do you think, Mom?" The fact that he was asking my opinion, actually valuing my input, meant more than I could express. "What about James?" I said quietly. "After your father." David looked at Ashley, and something passed between them. "We'd actually talked about that," Ashley said. "We weren't sure if it would be too painful for you." "It would be an honor," I said. "Your father would have loved this little boy so much. He would have been the best grandfather." And so, the baby became James David Thompson, JD for short. They asked me if I wanted to be there when they officially told family and friends, and I said yes. They made calls together, with me sitting right there, and David specifically mentioned that I'd been the one to suggest the name. It was a small thing, but it mattered. Ashley's mother flew back from Florida 4 days after the birth, and I was honestly anxious about meeting her. Would she be like her daughter had been, dismissive of me? Would there be tension over who was the real grandmother? But Deborah Cooper turned out to be a kind woman in her late 50s who immediately came over and hugged me when we met in Ashley's hospital room. "You're Maggie," she said. "Ashley told me what happened, how you came when she called, how you stayed through everything. Thank you for saving my daughter's life." The doctors saved her life, I said. I just kept a promise. Ashley also told me what she said to you about the wedding, about not wanting old people there. Deborah's voice was tight. I'm ashamed that my daughter said something so cruel, and I'm ashamed that I didn't raise her better than that. I owe you an apology, too, because clearly I failed to teach her basic respect and kindness. I was taken aback. I'd expected defensiveness, excuses, maybe even hostility. Instead, here was Ashley's mother, taking responsibility for her daughter's behavior. You don't need to apologize for your adult daughter's choices. No, I do, because I realize now that I contributed to it. I'm competitive, always have been. And when Ashley got serious with David, I think I unconsciously made it seem like it was a competition between me and you for who would be more involved, more important. I think that influenced how she approached the wedding and the pregnancy. I'm sorry for that, and I'm going to do better. There's room in this baby's life for both of us, and he'll be lucky to have two grandmothers who love him. That conversation with Deborah changed something. Suddenly, instead of feeling like I was fighting for scraps of inclusion, I felt like I was part of a team. Over the next few days, Deborah and I worked together to make sure Ashley had what she needed, coordinating who would visit when, who would bring food, who would handle various tasks. It wasn't perfect, but it was respectful. Ashley was released from the hospital a week after the emergency, and JD was released 2 days later. They'd asked me if I wanted to be there when they brought him home, and I said yes. I drove to their house in Scottsdale, the house I'd driven past months ago feeling excluded, and walked through the front door for the first time. It was a beautiful home, modern and spacious, with the nursery painted a soft blue, just like David had mentioned in his texts. Ashley's mother was already there, having flown in from Florida, and we helped get everything ready for JD's arrival. When David carried the car seat through the door with the baby inside, I felt that surge of love again, that fierce protectiveness. Over the following weeks, I established a routine of visiting twice a week, always coordinating with Deborah so we weren't overwhelming them. I'd hold JD, help with basic tasks, bring over meals I'd cooked. But I also maintained my boundaries. When they asked if I could babysit 3 nights a week so Ashley could go back to work full-time, I said no. I'm happy to help, I explained, but I'm not a built-in childcare solution. I'll babysit when I can, when it works for my schedule. But you need to make your own arrangements for regular childcare. I'm his grandmother, not his nanny. David looked hurt. I thought you wanted to be involved. I do want to be involved, as his grandmother. But I also have my own life, my own commitments at the community center, my own friends and activities. You don't get to exclude me when it suits you, and then expect me to rearrange my entire life when you need help. That's not a relationship. That's using someone. To their credit, they accepted this boundary without further argument. They hired a nanny for weekdays, and I volunteered to watch JD one weekend afternoon a week, which gave them some couple time and gave me precious one-on-one time with my grandson. As the months passed, something shifted. David started calling me regularly, not just to ask for help, but to actually talk. He'd tell me about his work frustrations, about the challenges of new parenthood, about his hopes for JD's future. Ashley made genuine efforts to include me, sending me photos throughout the week, asking my opinion on parenting decisions, inviting me to family dinners. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when I felt the sting of how they'd treated me. Still nights when I'd lie in bed and remember Ashley's voice saying, "We didn't want old people there." Some hurts don't fully heal, They just become something you learn to live with. But there were also beautiful moments. JD's first smile, which I got to witness during one of my weekly visits. His first laugh, which happened while I was holding him and David captured on video. The way he'd reach for me when I walked into a room. The way his face would light up when he heard my voice. 6 months after the crisis, David and Ashley invited me to a family dinner at their house. After we ate, they asked me to stay for a moment while Ashley's mother took JD upstairs for his bath. "Mom," David said, "we wanted to talk to you about something. Ashley and I have been in counseling, working through a lot of our issues, including what happened with you. And our therapist suggested we do something to mark a new beginning in our relationship with you, to acknowledge what we did wrong and commit to doing better." Ashley pulled out a box and handed it to me. Inside was a framed photo from my wedding to James in 1975. I hadn't even known they had this photo. It must have been among David's childhood pictures that I'd given him when he moved out. "We want you to know that we see you," Ashley said. "Not as old people, not as someone who's past their prime, but as a woman with a full life, a history, love, loss, and wisdom. This picture represents your beginning with James, your life together, raising David alone after James died. We were wrong to dismiss all of that, wrong to treat your age as a liability instead of recognizing it for what it really is, experience, strength, and a lifetime of love to share." I looked at the photo of James and me, so young and hopeful, and felt tears building. "Thank you," I managed to say. "There's more," David said. "We want to formally invite you to join us for our vow renewal ceremony next month. Yes, we're doing a vow renewal, a proper ceremony with family and friends. And you'll be there, in the front row, because that's where you should have been the first time." The tears spilled over then. Not because the gesture erased what had happened, but because it showed they understood what they'd taken from me, and they were trying to give something back. The vow renewal was beautiful. I wore a new dress that Ashley helped me pick out, and I sat in the front row next to JD in his little suit, and I watched my son and daughter-in-law commit to each other in front of the people who mattered. Afterward, David made a point of thanking me in his speech, acknowledging that they'd made mistakes, but they were committed to doing better. It wasn't the wedding I'd missed, but it was an acknowledgement, an apology in action, and it meant something. Here we are now, in November 2026, and JD is almost a year old. He's crawling, pulling himself up on furniture, babbling constantly. He has James's smile and David's eyes and Ashley's determination. He's a beautiful child, and I love him fiercely. My relationship with David and Ashley isn't what it was before the wedding, but maybe that's okay. Maybe it's better now, in some ways. It's more honest, less based on unspoken expectations and assumed availability. We have boundaries. We communicate clearly, and they treat me with respect. Do I still think about that phone call when Ashley said they didn't want old people at their wedding? Yes. Do I still feel the sting of those words sometimes? Yes. But I've learned something important through all of this. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending like nothing happened. It means choosing to move forward while acknowledging what happened, choosing to build something new while respecting the scars from what was broken. I think about the woman I was before all of this. The woman who would have accepted any treatment from David because I was so afraid of losing him completely. That woman would have driven to the hospital that morning and pretended like nothing was wrong. Would have provided childcare and support and help without ever addressing the hurt. That woman would have put everyone else's needs before her own dignity. I'm not that woman anymore. I showed up at the hospital that morning, but I did it on my own terms, with my eyes open, with my boundaries clear. And that made all the difference. The women at my community center still ask me about my situation sometimes. Some of them think I should have cut David off completely, that his betrayal was unforgivable. Others think I did exactly the right thing. But here's what I've learned. There's no one right answer to these situations. Every family is different. Every hurt is different. Every capacity for healing is different. What matters is that you don't lose yourself in the process. What matters is that you don't accept cruelty just because it comes from someone you love. What matters is that you know your worth isn't determined by whether someone else recognizes it. I'm 69 years old. That's not old people. That's a woman with nearly 7 decades of life experience, with wisdom earned through joy and pain, with love that's been tested and proven. I buried a husband, raised a son alone, worked for 31 years, survived heartbreak, and came out stronger on the other side. And I'm here to tell you, if you're listening and you're in a similar situation, if someone has made you feel like you're too old, too much, too irrelevant, you're not. Your age is not a liability. Your experience is valuable. Your love matters. Your presence deserves to be valued, not just tolerated or used when convenient. Maybe you're dealing with your own adult children who take you for granted. Maybe you're struggling with family members who only call when they need something. Maybe you're wondering if you should keep showing up for people who don't show up for you. I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you this. You deserve better. You deserve respect. You deserve to be treated like you matter because you do matter. If this story resonated with you, if you felt this same hurt or struggled with these same questions, I want to hear from you. Please take a moment to like this video. Your support helps these stories reach other women who need to hear them. And please subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Every story here comes from real life, real struggles, real women finding their strength in impossible situations. Leave a comment telling me what you thought of this story, or what you would have done in my place, or what country or city you're watching from. This community exists because women like you share your voices, your experiences, your wisdom. We're all in this together, learning how to navigate these complex relationships while maintaining our dignity and self-respect. Your comment, your like, your subscription, they help this channel grow and reach more women who need to know they're not alone. Last week, JD took his first steps. I was there, in Ashley and David's living room, and when he tottered across the floor from Ashley to me, his face lit up with pride and delight. I caught him as he fell into my arms and everyone cheered, and for that moment everything was perfect. After everyone calmed down, Ashley looked at me and said, "Thank you for being here, Maggie. Thank you for not giving up on us, even when we didn't deserve a second chance." I looked at my grandson in my arms, at my son beaming with pride, at my daughter-in-law who'd learned the hard way that cruelty has consequences, and I thought about forgiveness, about boundaries, about the difference between being nice and being kind. "I didn't do it for you," I said honestly. "I did it for me, because I needed to know I could stand up for myself and still choose compassion. And I did it for him, because he deserves a grandmother who models what healthy boundaries look like, who shows him that you can love people without accepting poor treatment, that you can forgive without forgetting." David came over and put his arm around my shoulders. "You're the strongest person I know, Mom. I don't think I ever really appreciated that until now." And maybe that's the real lesson in all of this. Strength isn't just about showing up. It's about showing up on your own terms. It's about knowing when to help and when to hold back, when to forgive and when to maintain distance, when to give second chances, and when to protect your own heart. I'm 69 years old and I'm not done yet. I have a grandson to help raise, a community to serve, friends to laugh with, and a life that's full and meaningful with or without anyone else's validation. I've learned that being old isn't a curse. It's a privilege denied to many. Every year I've lived, every experience I've had, every joy and every heartbreak has made me who I am. And who I am is someone worth respecting. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. It's never too late to set boundaries. It's never too late to demand respect. It's never too late to stop accepting cruelty just because it comes wrapped in family ties. And it's never ever too late to remember your own worth. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being part of this community of women who refuse to be invisible, who refuse to be dismissed, who refuse to accept being treated poorly just because we've reached a certain age. We matter. Our voices matter. Our experiences matter. Our love matters. And we're not old people. We're women who've earned every year, every wrinkle, every gray hair, and every ounce of wisdom. And that's something to be proud of. Take care of yourselves out there. Stand up for yourselves. Know your worth. And remember, showing up doesn't mean accepting poor treatment. You can be kind without being a doormat, forgiving without forgetting, loving without losing yourself. God bless you all, and thank you for listening.